Are you going cold turkey from the absence of Manx politics over the Christmas time? Perhaps you're full of Christmas love and cheer and looking forward to a bright and prosperous 2025. Well, on today's Perspective, we take a look back over the big stories that shaped the Manx political scene in 2024, as well as making a few predictions for 2025. Peel Commissioner and former MHK Ray Harmer will join me later in the programme, but first, well, I don't know, Alistair Ramsey, former journalist and political commentator, and Jed Power, former commissioner, political commentator. Anything else you would want to be known as?
Oh, I would say a tourism initiator, I would say. That's my kind of role on the Isle of Man, bringing people to the island and naturally just keeping an eye on things in your day-to-day business.
So, we are here to discuss the year past and to consider the year ahead. We'll start with Alistair then. What was the standout moment for the year just gone, would you say?
I think in terms of the ongoing political psychodrama, the no confidence vote in the Chief Minister was a highlight, if only because it was the first and only such vote since the ministerial system began nearly 40 years ago. So if Alf's going to be remembered for anything, I mean, he's got a first there. He survived it, of course, but I think it reflected the general kind of turmoil and churn, political churn has been one of the hallmarks of this administration.
Of course, Alf viewed this as a success because he had 14 votes to be made Chief Minister, and then his vote increased to 18. So his assumption was those 18 votes were votes of endorsement as opposed to votes not persuaded that they had no confidence left.
Whether it was a full endorsement or not, it was a kind of endorsement by default, because if people had really got no confidence at all in him and his government, they would have found an alternative. I know everyone said, well, there isn't anyone else, there's nobody else willing to do it. I think if things were that bad, they would have been able to find someone.
And well, I don't know, maybe the thinking behind the mover needed to be developed a little bit more. If you are going to have a vote of no confidence, you need to at least present what the alternatives might look like.
Not necessarily. I think if Tynwald of the Parliament has got to the point where they have no confidence in the government, then it cannot be allowed to continue in that form. And that's your first decision, is to decide whether you have any confidence. Then you move on to what you do next. That's my view, anyway.
Jed?
It's an indication of the government performance as a whole that it actually came to this vote of no confidence. It doesn't really reflect a great deal of success in the chamber. We haven't seen a great deal of unity. We've seen a lot of bickering and a lot of time wasted in this year. And really, you ask yourself, what has come out at the end of the pipeline that is really productive? There's hundreds of questions being asked and supplementaries and things like that. But ultimately, what are we seeing for it?
Well, one of the things that I looked at when I was having a think about this programme, which occasionally I do more than a few minutes before we start recording, the thing that perhaps was the standout moment was the very bold move by the Treasury Minister and backed by Council of Ministers and ultimately backed by Tynwald to put up the higher rate of income tax by 2%. That certainly got a reaction, and it's fair to say that government, after initially blaming the media for misunderstanding, perhaps over the course of the last 8 or 9 months, they've realised that maybe the public have some concerns about this.
I think that might be a measure of their political naivety, to think that you could put up income tax for the first time, was it in 14 years or something, without there being a reaction. Because putting up taxes is not something that we're used to in the Isle of Man. We're supposed to be based on low taxation. So I think they should have been better prepared for that, and there should be more explanation and more kind of rationalising of what it was for. And then the subsequent shambles of saying, this is only temporary, we're going to have a health levy, and then saying, oh no, we can't do a health levy because it's more complicated than we thought, really is not very impressive. You would have thought that you would have worked all that out before you announced that you were going to have a health levy, unless by complicated they meant politically complicated in that the other ministers weren't supporting it. I don't know.
And Jed, I mean, you're a Labour Party man. Labour Party weren't best pleased with this, particularly because whilst, expecting people who pay higher rate income tax to pay a bit more generally around the world is seen as a good thing, in the Isle of Man, almost everybody who's got any sort of a reasonable job is paying higher rate income tax.
Well, a progressive tax structure would be preferred, of course, but really the 2% was actually 10% increase, and even in the budgetary paperwork at the time it was scripted as 2%, and you just wonder whether any of our MHKs were hoodwinked by that to begin with. But I always look at June Watterson, who is a qualified accountant, and he will challenge the budgetary process every year. And he's done it again, hasn't he, where he's wanting it to be reviewed and for having a little bit more insight into what's coming in on the big day, because the MHKs have just got no choice, have they? They've either got to vote for it or against it. And it's like the curate's egg, really. It's good in parts, but there are parts of it that can't be rejected. And the taxation structure, really, the damage I think we're going to see over the next few years.
And that health levy, or health and social care levy, it would appear from utterings perhaps of the Treasury Minister that they may not be quite ready to introduce it this year, and perhaps the higher rate of income tax may have to stay. Although, of course, Treasury Ministers often get a bit coy about what may or may not be in their budgets. But do you think, Alistair, that we are going to see the health levy introduced and replace the higher rate income tax?
I'd be surprised if we did, because it's the kind of thing that needs proper preparation, consultation. I mean, the whole issue of funding the health service, which the Michael report highlighted as something, we need to put more funding into health. That should have been addressed years ago, frankly, but it's one of those things that's difficult, so there's always more urgent and pressing things that get in the way. Just to say we're going to have a health levy and then just kind of pull it out of the hat, I don't think is the right way to do something that important. You need to gather people's ideas in, and at the same time kind of prepare the ground in the public mind for the fact that, guys, you're going to have to pay more for health services.
And of course, recently released from ministerial control, Laurie Hooper did his best to persuade Tynwald to alter these things in the December Tynwald. He was looking to have that higher rate of income tax reduced back to 20%. He was looking to get everyone to pay national insurance regardless of whether they'd reached retirement age or not, and he was looking to remove the tax cap. I guess from a Labour Party perspective, all of those are reasonable things to ask for.
Well, the signs is that we've run out of money. We should be able to have a perfectly good health service along with all the public sector demands that are out there. But it's down to the plain fact that this administration is delivering nothing new to the island, that there's nothing fun. I think the outcome may be a sewage plant in Laxey, and that's your lot. So, dreams of having a statue dedicated to Mark Cavendish's achievements, that isn't going to happen. And really, the messages that are coming out of the health service, the arm length way of operation, is that there's some huge expenditure on salaries. We've seen that from FOIs and other disclosures, and it just seems to be in complete turmoil.
So you don't think then, Jed, a cycle track round the Laxey sewage treatment works would suffice? You could combine the two.
I think it could be too hilly up there. but in all honesty, really, the message for the Isle of Man, we've got to think about people who want to live here and stay here and come here to reside. And the messages that are being sent out aren't positive. And really, we've got to be identified as a place that is wonderful, has a great quality of life. And at the moment, it just isn't happening. Those messages aren't there.
So, one of your picks then from the year, what other things happened during the year that you think are the highlights for the year?
Honestly, I'll turn the clock back. It must be 2 hours. And it was the parting shot of Laurie Hooper. And it summed the whole year up, really. It's where they were going to go into extra time, and there weren't a great many questions left on the list, and there was a vote, and the majority was to cut the questions. Julie Edge tried to have an extra thrown in, can we do it at the end of business, which is perfectly reasonable, but no, they elected to go home, start the Christmas holidays early, and they're back on at the end of January. Now, some of those questions that were on later in the agenda, these are really important matters to members of the public. The likes of, say, what are going to be the issues regarding the wind farm and drainage and things like that people are obviously concerned about. And no, it's going to be kicked into the long grass for, another 5 weeks away.
Not necessarily, though. I mean, if questions aren't reached in the order paper, I mean, they have an allotted hour for questions. If the question is not reached, then the opportunity to have a written answer is available.
It's true, but let's face it, it's been a very extended summer holiday break, and I think for the sake of an hour, I think that would be a good message to just send out to the Manx public that we're striving on your behalf, we're examining and questioning everything. But that kind of arrogance, and you could see the sense of frustration in Laurie Hooper's voice where he just says, oh, you're a bunch of part-timers or something like that, which kind of encapsulated a lot of the mood of that room.
Alistair, any thoughts on that, or perhaps any other picks from the year?
I think one of the other, it's not really a highlight, it's a low light, but it stands out in the year, was the revelation of modern slavery happening in our midst, something that would have been utterly inconceivable a few years ago. That's something that happens in other countries far away from us, combined with the departmental welcome from the Department for Enterprise for an operation that turned out to be run by alleged Chinese gangsters. So there was actually a ministerial welcome for this initiative, which struck me as absolutely extraordinary, and even more extraordinary that no member has asked any questions about the modern slavery. No minister or the chief minister have not made a statement recognising the suffering of these poor people. No member has called for an independent inquiry into this, and if ever anything warranted that, it's this. The governance systems within the government seem to have failed completely around the immigration system, and yet there's radio silence, almost because it's like too difficult, too dangerous. They will have all been told it's sub judice, and they swallow that every time. So personally, I was very disappointed, if not disgusted, by that whole business, the political response to that. And maybe somebody will yet call for an inquiry into that business, but I don't know.
Jed, I mean, were you surprised to learn about both things, but particularly the modern slavery element, bearing in mind the Isle of Man? One of the great features about the Isle of Man is everybody knows everyone else's business. So the fact that this could happen in the Isle of Man without people knowing is quite extraordinary, isn't it?
It didn't surprise me, because we do have a lot of business going on connected with that sector. Okay, So it's the gaming sector, and it reaches far and wide from different jurisdictions. And you'd imagine that there's a lot of interplay between people involved in that, moving in and out of the various jurisdictions and so forth. Now, there's been a focus, you might have gone to the government conference, and Alf Cannon, he was stressing about border controls, and you're wondering whether this was a reaction to this, and you wonder how far this is going to go and how much this is going to inhibit our travel. I remember his speech, he was relating about knife crime, riots, terrorism, all these things that were going on in the UK, and it did sound quite heavy-handed. So I'm hoping that everyone can keep an eye on this one and what's actually going to happen down at the ports, because even now you can see that there are changes. You see some almost paramilitary style staff, the way they dress, okay, and they're seeing people in and out of the island, and I'm not quite sure whether we need to go that far.
Certainly one of the things that surprised me at the government conference was police officers wandering around with firearms, as if that in some way was going to give me some level of reassurance. I mean, I was quite disturbed to note this.
I was worried about this and the mantra that the Chief Minister came out with, because I remember listening to that speech and thinking there was some fear being instilled here, that we're under threat. But it was around the time that we had the riots in the UK, and there was a lot of energy, negative energy taken from that and shared with us as though this is what we're going to encounter on the island. And I think, we don't want to get distracted, really, and we don't want to make the place unwelcome, say, for visitors, because let's face it, with the activities down at the airport and at the sea terminal, it's difficult enough getting visitors here as it is.
And Alistair, I mean, one of the things that Isle of Man government, we are told, is now internally very good at is reacting to things almost as soon as they've happened, possibly with undue haste. Now, on the one hand, if you can react in reasonable time, you can potentially put out a fire that could, get out of control. But reacting to every single thing that happens without perhaps giving it as much thought as you might, is that something that you've noticed with government?
I think there is a pattern there. I think on this issue of border control, or tighter borders, I mean, personally, I'm in favour of that. I think it should have happened years ago, because the big threat is from organised crime around drugs, county lines. We're just across the sea from one of the major drugs capitals of Europe. One of our selling points is it's a safe community, or a relatively safe community. People are concerned that that's breaking down. So maybe it's just a reflection of the fact that I'm getting older, but I'm not an expert in this area at all. But I can understand the emphasis on the security. But I think the danger is if you overdo it, then actually people feel less safe if they see armed police officers as a routine, as if you're living in Belfast or somewhere.
And of course, Jed, in a former life,
I'll come in here.
Yeah.
So 20 years ago, we had over 5,000 crimes a year, okay, and we had extreme violence on Douglas Promenade. We'll remember those days. We had 4 murders in 4 months. We had multiple assaults. We had homes being burgled. Now, these things don't happen on that level anymore, okay, and that's because things are tidied up. I think we're a little bit quicker on how we detect things, and of course we've got full employment, and I think there's a better quality of life. And generally, on a day-to-day business, we don't experience crime, okay? And I do think that there's been a bit of scaremongering with, the county line situation and so forth. Of course, we've got drug dealing going on, but we always have. Okay, so I think there's been a bit of muscle flexing. I think, what you said, armed police around the government conference. And I think they actually were quizzed about that, and there was an inference that, oh yes, there was reason to be there, but that's never been expanded on. And it's things like that that need tidying up.
They must have heard we were coming. Well, we've had a good look then at 2024. What about 2025? anyone prepared to be bold enough to make some predictions as to what might happen in the year to come?
I'll go with it'll be more of the same. I think there's a bit of a stranglehold on the vote. I think there's been some movement with Claire Christian, who was viewed as an opposition member, part of the gang, and all that clever questioning has now gone. So it'll be interesting to see how that evolves. But really, the Isle of Man public is going to be asking the question, what is coming out at the end of the pipeline? Because we've got full employment, we've got people in business working super hard and paying taxes, and this extra 10% tax. And what is coming out at the end of the pipeline that's benefiting the community and everyone? And at the moment, there's little evidence that there's anything really productive and good.
Would you share that rather pessimistic outlook, Alistair?
I think the public are particularly disenchanted, more so than in the past. I mean, every government is the worst government ever. That's a kind of rule of Manx life. But I think more people, different people are saying that now, fairly or unfairly. I think the February budget will be a bit of a crunch point as to how they're going to manage the competing demands for increased spending with a public mood that is very concerned about the staffing, spending in government. They've announced this 10 million a year efficiency initiative, and we've heard nothing more really about that. Will the Treasury Minister address that? Is it his idea? Maybe it's from somebody else. I get the impression that there are kind of conflicting agendas within government that makes them a bit dysfunctional. Will they mention, or will there be any comment on the rumoured revision of the VAT sharing agreement that's supposedly going on in the background and could deprive us of another slice of revenue? So there's a lot to play for at the February budget. Normally the budgets go through by a comfortable majority. I don't think we'll be looking at that this time.
One of the things perhaps we were remiss to not mention in the year just gone, of course, was the introduction of 3 new ministers at a time. It's fair to say I interviewed Alf Cannon shortly after the November Tynwald, and I mean, it had been a long sitting. It was a full 3 days, and he looked exhausted, and I almost felt sorry for him. I felt as though I ought to put my arm round him and comfort him in some way. He looked down and out, it's fair to say. And then 3-4 days later, he announces not only 1 new minister, but 3 new ministers into the cabinet. That's bound to have some kind of impact as we go through the next year or two on the run-up to the election.
Well, who he chose, Claire Christian and Michelle Haywood, and I guess you're alluding to, is it Tim Krukall on the sidestep?
Tim stays and David Ashford comes in. Yeah.
Certainly, listening to Michelle Haywood and Claire Christian, this certainly put a different tone in the performances on the floor. They seem a little bit more decisive, quicker, sharper, and I'm wondering how Alf is going to manage that in his team, because they won't take any messing, and I think they're politicians with principles. So it is going to be an interesting time, because there will be some challenges getting thrown in.
Alistair?
Yeah, I mean they're smart members, so they're a good choice for ministers, and even more so with Claire Christian, because I mean it means that the so-called Rebel Alliance is kind of not exactly neutralised, but quite severely undermined.
Although they do claim that Claire Christian remains a member of the... Now, what were it's the Policy Alliance, isn't it?
I'm not up to speed with the names.
I know every time I try and remember their name, I get it wrong. But whoever they are, the view from the non-ministerial members is that Ms. Christian remains within that group.
I mean, the Manx politics is pretty elastic, so you can be anti-government and in government. vote no confidence in the Chief Minister and then shortly after become a minister yourself, working with him.
Because again,
quite
quite bizarrely, Chris Thomas was sacked as a member for the Department of Health and Social Care for speaking and voting against the Chief Minister in the no confidence vote, and yet his colleague Claire Christian, who did the same, ends up being a minister.
Yeah, it's quite hard to rationalise sometimes. And the interesting thing about, one of the distinctive things about this administration is the churn of members and ministers. No one's in position for very long, or very few of them are in position for long enough to really get a grip on it, and then there's another big raft of changes. Is that a deliberate strategy to keep people on their toes, or is it a reflection of a kind of chaotic approach that is constantly looking for change and new ways of doing things? And I don't know the answer to that, but it is a mark of this regime.
And of course, you mentioned that sharpness and principled nature of the new ministers. But of course, Council of Ministers is a meeting of minds and a consensus building organisation, if nothing else. If it is to work, then each party's individual principles have to be modified to try and deliver the general vision of the whole of Council of Ministers. Is this just a short-term thing, do you expect, or do you think the new ministers will continue to be sharp in their approach?
I think the two new ministers are savvy enough to start asking the questions and really identifying who has actually been running the place. I know that, and I look forward to what they'll uncover, but I just hope that they can come and speak to the likes of yourself and share the truth with what they find, because the health service, anecdotally, is still in a mess, even with this injection of massive amount of cash. Okay, and we need to have a way that can be measured. What is the success of service in there? So, some sort of, we hit with consultations all the time, but, let's have something that's meaningful and find out, well, exactly what are the numbers, with dealing with patients and the success with operations and things like that. And we need that data, and we need to see it quick, because the public are at the end of the tether.
I guess one of the big questions that's yet to be answered is whether it is possible to bring Manx care within its budget in a painless way. And the hope, I think, is that if you, by sheer effort of political will and getting some heavyweight politicians in there, that somehow or other they can make the numbers match. Whereas Laurie Hooper, I think, would say that, look, that there isn't a pain-free way of meeting the budget. They just need more money because it's the nature of health services. I don't know the answer to that, but I think that's one of the big issues.
Because, of course, that's another of the remarkable things that happened in 2024. Admittedly, the back end of 2024, but we have a new minister in place, Claire Christian, and her departmental members are ministers David Ashford and I forget which were Jane Poole-Wilson. And those three ministers are aided and abetted by the chief minister when he's not busy doing chief minister type things. So 4 ministers trying to sort this.
Is that because Claire has got the handcuffs on, should we say? Is she not allowed to freely operate? Is that how it works? Could she be guided?
I'm guessing it might feel like that to the new minister.
I think they would say that it's to support her in this very difficult and important role. Because if they can't stem the flow from health, then all the other budgets are under threat. And I think that's what's really panicked people. It's very interesting that last year was the first time that the government started to talk about financial discipline. It hadn't really been on the agenda at all for years, and something has spooked them, I think.
And the argument for that was, well, of course, we had COVID and there was lots and lots of government expenditure went out during that time, and cutting expenditure really couldn't have happened, because we already had those difficulties in relation to the Manx economy. So that's the excuse that's given. Although perhaps as we got further away from the actual COVID lockdowns, it became more of an excuse than a reason.
That excuse has been used way too long now. But I can recall that Dr. Allenson, when he's referring to the impending pension deficit, and his mantra was along the lines of, we need to do something about this now. But this spectre has been above us for, a decade, hasn't it? And they've known about it. And it puzzles me, really. And when you've got the likes of, say, Juan Watterson, who's an accountant, who's got a vested interest in the budget and how it works, and yet this is allowed to continue with these reserves dwindling, and at the moment there's no signs of any new business, there's no signs of the population growing and the economy expanding. So how are we going to address this? And this is absolutely critical, and I would say anyone who's been in government for 2 terms has really got to look at themselves and ask themselves, why have they not challenged this and acted? And I'm really disappointed that some of those MHKs who've got the qualifications haven't done their job.
One of the interesting things that we will have, and it'll be 4 years of entertainment if it wasn't so serious, is the new American president who will take office in January. Is that going to make for a more stable world, both economically and in security-wise, do we think?
This is to make us look a bit more stable, presumably, this conversation. I'm certainly not an expert on the international scene, but I would have thought that on the face of it, it would make the world a lot more unstable. But it's the question with Trump is, I guess, is he genuinely nuts, or is it all part of a kind of clever ploy? Yeah.
I'll take a different slant. I deal with Americans regularly. I was speaking with one yesterday who happened to be on the island, and they're pleased about the installation of Trump. And if you refer to his previous term, where maybe we didn't have the problems regarding conflicts around the world at that time, I'm just speaking off the top of my head here, but the economy in the USA was much more favourable for certain types of society. So we'll just wait and see. But he's very watchable. The election was fascinating. It really was. And for him to come in with a landslide like that, he's got the support of the nation. As for the impact on the Isle of Man, we've got to be looking over our shoulders for any tax controls that could come in, anything relating to our gaming sector and so forth, and trade, and things that may impact the UK as well.
Do we, in the Isle of Man, need a system-wrecking politician like Donald Trump, someone who is not prepared to accept the norms and conventions of political life?
A disruptor. A populist disruptor. Well, we had Peter Caron in the past, didn't we? Maybe the time is right now. If the public are disenchanted, there's been a lot of changes in the island. There's a feeling that the place is changing a lot. Maybe that could emerge. We'll see.
I think anyone coming in has to have the drive to reform the Parliament. I think the cost of salaries for 24 MHKs for 5 years is £9 million to start off with. You could probably double that with all the extras. And again, it's what is coming out at the end of the pipeline. And this is what we've got to view. What positivity is coming out? Because if we don't have that, if the island doesn't grow, we're going to have some challenging times ahead.
Do you think if we could travel back in time to the introduction of the ministerial system, the same politicians, were they able to travel forward and take up their roles now? Would they be able to do a better job, or are we just looking back at the past with rose-tinted spectacles?
I think they might, but of course it is a lot more complicated now. what government has to do is a lot more complicated. The external scene is more complicated. But what they did achieve in the first 10 years of the ministerial system was a kind of steady consensus, although it wasn't without its drama and sackings and so on. But there was a kind of air of stability there that has been gradually lost, I think, over the last 5 or more years.
I'm afraid, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we had the VAT cushion, and everyone was happy. There was money swirling round for all kinds of projects, the likes of the NSC, the Iris system, the new hospital, the new prison. All that happened not through political skill. I think it was just a case of the money was in the bank and these projects went ahead. So I don't think there's really any iconic ministers, but I will say that in that time you will have had politicians who've made it in business and perhaps a little bit more savvy. And I think if you look at the spectrum of our MHKs and look at the backgrounds, and you might go, I'm not quite sure they're really up to this.
That was Manx Labour Party member Jed Power and political commentator Alistair Ramsey. I'm joined now by Peel Commissioner Ray Harmer. So, of course, Christmas being busy, it wasn't possible to coordinate diaries to get everyone in the studio at the same time to actually get this programme recorded. But Ray Harmer, you're with us now. What are the standout moments for you during the course of the last 12 months?
Oh, there's quite a few, but I have to start with Mark Cavendish. For me was the standout moment. I mean, that was quite incredible. I'm not sure we'll see that again, and for us to be up there, 35 victories was amazing. And so I think we've got to really sort of celebrate that. I mean, obviously the world is an interesting space at the moment. You've got, in politics, you've got Trump doing his thing, re-elected. I don't think anybody would have thought that. And then Labour with a thumping majority, and then you've got some sort of...
And bizarre, that Labour Party thing, because, of course, a thumping majority with even fewer votes than Jeremy Corbyn got when he was roundly defeated. It's a bizarre system, isn't it?
It's absolutely crazy, and I don't think it was ever really thought of or designed when you got these multi-parties, and it's sort of creaking at the seams. And it's funny, I think in the next election we could really see some really interesting results, because a few percentage points either way could completely change. And who would have thought Liberal Democrats are back up with 72? I thought they were gone forever, once, with the student loans and so forth. So.
Absolutely. And SNP, of course, crashing and burning, really very, having been the second largest, the third largest, but pretty close to the Labour Party in numbers. They had a pretty poor set of results. So interesting stuff. Mark Cavendish, I think it really is important that we acknowledge that. I know Jed mentioned this earlier, and I rather mischievously suggested, because he said the only thing we've managed to achieve so far is a sewage plant in Laxey. And they said maybe we could put a cycle track round the outside for Mark Cavendish.
But he was there, right from the beginning. That when you saw the live, which was on that show, I think it's Netflix, wasn't it? Where basically you saw him going round the NSC on that sort of track and racing when he was like 8 or 9 years old. It just shows you what can be done, and it just shows the potential that we have.
And I think all too often in the Isle of Man we limit ourselves with our own imaginations, don't we? There's no reason at all why the Isle of Man can't produce elite athletes and brilliant scientists and excellent writers. All of these things are possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Because we've got the mix that we need to have. So, for example, from a training point of view, you've got hills and flat bits. You've got more time on your hands.
Flat bits is a technical term, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm thinking of the north.
Yes.
It's not quite as hilly as as sort of the Snae Fell, but I think we've all got we forget that we have so much more time. You have a day can finish at 5, but you can start and do lots of other interests, and even as children they have access to all sorts of. I mean, the NSC is quite incredible to have that facility quite close, and regional pools as well. So we really have it within our grasp to sort of take that. And I think technology, our schools are generally really good. We don't batter people with so many loans if they do want to go to university, and there's loads of opportunities. People don't realise that there's actually loads of opportunities on the island. And I was reflecting with somebody from who sort of leads things in Singapore. And Singapore are very big in AI, and they were saying that what we've got here in terms of computing power is incredible. Again, for what relatively, I think we keep concentrating on our small sizes, but we definitely can punch above our weight, and we have everything we need here, which is great.
And of course, in Peel, one of the great things that happened in Peel during the year was the beach got fed up waiting for people to come to it, and it decided to come to the people.
Do you know what you've hit on the weather point? That was quite a major event, and I think I can't recall a storm. I think that was for Peel, particularly in the west. It really, and you could put deck chairs on the. Literally on the road, and we were tempted to do that, but I mean, and then there was, I think all the glass came through the atrium and through the house, and the tiles actually made quite a nice little neat border on somebody's, But I mean, fortunately, there was no. There was no accidents, and it was all safe, but it was quite a sight and quite scary. I think that day I'd literally just bunkered into the house and didn't just hope it would wait for it to pass. But I think it hit the west quite more than anywhere else, actually.
And I suppose you are a Peel Town Commissioner.
Yeah.
Any particular highlights you think in Peel over the course of the last year?
Well, I do remember August being really, really wet, but the Meta Lounge was really, really worked. Those days, I think it was the last day, it was really sunny, and it gave something a bit different. So that was really good, and it really does look like we're going to get a sewage plant. Apparently the decision is in. So
that of course is looking forward. So
this
is an early prediction.
That is an early prediction, but I think it's been a generally a good year. I think we had a good TT as well. We had lots of visitors, so a good tea, and there was a lot going on. There's always busy in Peel, but despite the weather, despite August, I think was literally rained off, wasn't it? And Peel is looking good in the football as well. So,
can't be bad. And of course, you mentioned the TT there. The great happening in the TT, probably one of the most memorable moments I've ever witnessed. Except from I was around when Mike Halewood returned and won the TT. I forget when that was, in the 70s sometime. But we were actually on one of the grandstands, the less expensive grandstand up at the start line, and we were there when Michael Dunlop broke Uncle Joey's record, and it was such an emotional thing. I wouldn't have imagined it, because he pulled in front of us, and poor fellow sort of broke down with all the emotion. It was really a tremendous thing to witness, and what a tremendous achievement.
That was absolutely amazing. And earlier in the week, if I recall correctly, it wasn't too good, was it? And he had some real sort of issues and false starts with other drivers and other things going on. But that was amazing, really. Again, it's one of those sort of things where you think that's not going to be broken when Joe did that, and then Michael comes along and breaks it, and it was really great TT. It was
And the I suppose we ought to have a little look. I mean, we've already picked over the bones of Manx politics with Jed and Alistair, but were there any particular things that you noted during the year and either thought, I'm glad I'm not part of that anymore, or thought...
Definitely glad not to be part of that anymore. I mean, it's. Do you know what, the shuffling of chairs is fascinating. I don't know. I mean, you probably have a longer memory, but in a sense of. But for me, this is almost like, well, they're a minister and then they're not, and then something else happens, and then they're all friends again, and then they come back in the fold, and then they're out of the fold, and then they're. And that too. And of course, I mean, the sort of no confidence vote that was really not a non-event, I think, was an interesting, fascinating thing as well.
Yes, there is a revolving door as you go into the Tinwald building, isn't there?
Yes.
And that revolving door was spinning faster than ever, or seems to have been over the last 3 years.
Yeah, and it does make very interesting reading. I don't really totally get it. To be honest, I think, if you're standing for something different and it's clear what you're standing, then fair enough. But then they're all back in again the following week. So, I mean, as an outside observer, it's fascinating. But I don't think you can sort of be interesting. Some interesting points though that may not have sort of been picked up. The actual fact that we're now getting, I think it's from tax from big companies, 35 million. That's going to help things next year. And one of the big things with the Labour Party getting into power is they've really gone full on getting rid of non-domiciles. They've gone big on inheritance tax, CGT, all of those regulations. That actually is some real positive opportunities for us next year. So it'd be interesting to see how that plays out. But yeah, I think the revolving door, and I suppose you can't really, at the end of the day, it was an intriguing 2% increase. I think there's some sort of better ways of doing that, flexibility. But I think the revolving door has to be the standout moment.
Well, we've only a few minutes left to talk about predictions. I mean, you've made a prediction about probably some insider knowledge on the Peel sewage.
No. I'm just. Well, I have heard that the decision is in. I've heard that, and I'm just absolutely. I've always said, as soon as that plant is in, I'll be going out to swim in it, and I'm really looking forward to it. I think it's the thing we're all really, really, really want.
Yeah.
So
any other, and you don't need to limit yourself to Peel or indeed the Isle of Man and predictions. Something that we can look forward to in 25.
Well, in theory, it should be. Actually, there's less elections next year, but actually, the big one's going to be Trump. I think that's going to be very interesting how he deals with Ukraine. I'm hoping that it isn't going to be sort of something that ends up making Ukraine a lot smaller and has problems. I think hopefully there'll be some more stability in the Middle East, but there's some. And of course, the big one, obvious one, is going to be hotter next year than it's ever been before. So that's a clear one. But there's some really good things that will happen next year. It's looking really good on cancer. There's probably going to be some good news around that, from what I can see, and things are getting better energy wise.
And in terms of that's new cures or treatments,
and even possibly a vaccine.
Right,
so I've read. And I know it's a field that many people work on, and also solar energy is getting. They predict another 20% cheaper next year. So the massive. And AI, you can't end of the day, whether it's next year or the next couple of years, we're going to see some massive changes, and that's going to need all of us to sort of change the way we do things. So I think they're sort of the big things, and we're all just keeping our fingers crossed that it's a peaceful year. But I won't go into any more than that.
Yes, well, and I suppose as we look forward to the new year, any particular New Year's resolution that you're likely to be making, or you're not wanting to tell anyone?
No, I'm going to be doing the Manchester Marathon, so I've got to get fit again, and this time it's for keeps, because I do this and then sort of
yes, that's the problem. Anyway, thanks very much, Ray, for coming into the programme. Nollaig Gennell and Blaine Fevi, have a good 2025.
Nollaig Gennell.
So what do you think? Are the predictions for next year overly pessimistic, or is that bright star in the east a giant meteor heading straight for us? Whatever your views, it has been my pleasure over the past year to have your company as I try to present some of the political issues the island is facing. I hope you're having a good Christmas and that 2025 provides you with good fortune and exciting challenges. Let me know your thoughts on the programme by contacting Phil Gorn at manxradio.com and get in touch if you have any ideas for future shows. Don't forget the programme is available as a podcast on Manx Radio's website. I'm Phil Gorn, Nollaig Gennell as Blaine Fevi.